Many romantic movements are ruined by the excesses they fall prey to. The Transcendentalists struggled against their strict New England habits, but those conventions helped keep them from inordinate behavior and self-indulgence. They were sometimes called German atheists by their critics, but more to the point, many Transcendentalists were very near full secularism. That later secularism, known as the Golden Age of Free Thought, lasted approximately from 1856 to the start of World War I in 1914. It was a different movement, greatly influenced by the great agnostic Robert Greene Ingersoll, 1833 to 1899, and by Darwin's Origin of Species, published in 1859. Please see Atheist History in the U.S. at AtheistScholar.org. We shall be looking at agnosticism in a future lecture very thoroughly, as well as a lecture on the Golden Age of Free Thought, especially Robert Greene Ingersoll. These are the words of Theodore Parker on the Transcendentalist movement: to test ethics by conscience, science by reason, to try the creeds of churches, the constitution of the states, by the constitution of the universe. The Transcendentalists grappled with important social issues that we of the 21st century are still attempting to resolve. I can only hope that our current secular movement, which is gaining great momentum at present, will retain the same high-mindedness, indeed the grandeur of thought and action of the earlier Transcendentalist movement. This lecture has been a tribute to a noble movement of the past. It is also a look forward to a secular future where, in the words of Emerson, the hobgoblin of little minds has been soundly defeated, and the mists of superstition have been dispersed by the sunlight of reason. I would like to quote Thoreau once more as we conclude this lecture. He ends Walden by saying that the sun is but a morning star, which heralds the breaking of a new day, a new order, a new dispensation in America. Thank you for your attention during this long lecture. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Good.
Did they call themselves Transcendentalists, or was that something that was put upon them?
They call themselves Transcendentalists.
And this term, you really never explored the origins of this. Isn't this a German philosophical movement to begin
Well,
with?
it's many movements. You know, as I said, it's from Carlyle. It's from, you remember, he was British. His starter was
But
artist.
did they steal it from those movements?
No, they didn't. They were reading these people just as, you know, everybody fertilizes everybody else when you're, you know, like doing philosophy.
But when you choose to call yourself the same thing, it must mean that you have the affinity.
Well, they didn't really call themselves the same thing. I don't believe that Carlyle called himself a transcendentalist at any time.
What did he call himself?
Actually, I don't know. I think he was so individualistic he didn't really call himself anything. I'm not sure.
But as I recall, there was a preceding to the Transcendentalists. There was a German transcendental philosophy
Yeah, but that was Kantian.
that was different. than
Yeah,
this.
and that was different. Kant is quite different. But they did pick up a lot of his ideas.
I was
yeah.
gonna say, I was reading and it said that there was a lot of Kant's influence.
Yeah, Kant was very influential on their thinking.
I just-
Kant was influential on everybody's thinking, and I mean, current philosophers still grapple with Kant, especially in Europe.
I guess what I'm wondering is who coined the term, and transcendental to what is what I'm wondering about.
Transcendental to just the everyday, as it were.
To
the
transcend
common thing. Yeah, to
the everyday.
transcend somehow the everyday and to make some kind of correspondence, like I said, between, you know, the human and the nature. That was very important, correspondence.
But are you able to trace who actually coined this term?
No, you know,
For
I
that.
should have probably done a little bit better. Does anybody know?
Well,
I thought it came from the Germans, but I could be wrong. I think that this is one of those terms that were used in several different contexts, like what we talked about with TM.
But American Transcendentalism was like a philosophy unto itself, if you can even call it a philosophy.
But how much were they rebels, and how much were they truly, creating something from the ground up?
Well, they were creating things from the ground up, but they had borrowed from the Europeans, of course, but this was like a huge breakthrough in America.
This history site
Mhm.
defined it as Transcendentalism is a very formal word that describes a simple idea. By the way, it's apparently so simple that I don't get it.
It's very complex, actually.
People, it says people, men and women equally, have knowledge about themselves and the world around them that transcends
Sense.
or goes beyond what they see, hear, taste, touch, and feel.
Yeah.
And as I was listening to you and I was reading this, it's talking about they don't necessarily accept these things as religious beliefs, but at the same time, everything, it's, you know what it sounded like to me? Yeah, exactly. Spiritualism. It was like, okay, we don't want to be religious anymore because we're rejecting this, but we're not forward thinking enough to call ourselves
Well,
crazy atheists because we just can't go
Well,
there.
they couldn't quite get themselves there, but
Yeah.
it was so important. It was such a breakthrough. I was hoping I could convey that, but I
You
guess
did.
I didn't. Did I?
Yes.
Well, I did the
You
Remember.
probably did.
Remember, they're born into the heart of Calvinism. These
Right,
people are
you
coming
did.
out.
And we have to put ourselves, not today,
Yeah.
but back then, it
Yeah.
was much harder
They're
to
Puritan.
be that.
They were born from Puritan stock.
But
And
you-
it's not just it's
Nathaniel-
not just your local minister.
Right.
It's your community
It's the
that
world, you
thinks
know.
this way. Yeah.
But you made a comment that it was, oh, what did you say? Wait, I had it, I think I had it in my note. You made a comment, reject, I can't remember, but you made it sound like it was something, I don't know, I guess I'm confused because it doesn't seem to me to be very, they said something about it created an American state of mind in which imagination was better than reason.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, which I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well that's probably why I rejected it to begin with. I have no
But you know,
imagination.
imagination is
reason.
really important.
It is.
It's
No, I
as-
understand,
It's as
but-
important as
but-
reason, because reason only
but
takes you so far.
Saying that it's better than reason, I don't know.
Means
Well,
to be
I think they were
Right.
they were reacting against that reasonable, you know, kind of New England, you know, hard-headedness.
Not reacting then against the age of reason or the pursuit of
No.
science.
No.
I guess I'm trying to define what they were talking about.
really they
Reason.
were very much into, like, you know, interested in science. They were very interested in things like that.
And you can't get interested in science unless you're working with reason.
Well, that's why.
It has
But
to
they
be
used the
reason.
word reason, and that's why I was trying to clarify
Yeah.
how they were. Because
No,
that would
they-
be contradictory.
It's
to
really
me.
hard. It seems contradictory, but they were actually very, very reasonable. You'll find that if you ever read Walden, you'll see how hard-headed Thoreau is.
But the Enlightenment was already well underway.
Oh yeah, it was,
Yeah,
it was
yes.
done.
So,
Yeah.
so
Well going.
I'm having trouble understanding why these people were considered original.
Yeah. Me too.
Even
Well,
for
'cause
their
they
time.
were a little different than the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
They were extremely different. I mean,
Because,
you know.
because they were holding on to their spiritual.
That-
yeah, they were
that's what I
holding
was
on
just
to their idea.
So it's almost a
in-
backward.
Right.
It's a backwardness.
Well, no, it isn't. It isn't. You know, I mean, for a while there, deism with, you know, Franklin and Washington and you know, Jefferson was very important, but you know, that died out
Which is a damn shame.
in this country. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a damn shame, but you know, then all this Puritan stuff took over. I mean, Nathaniel Hawthorne, like, one of his ancestors was like one of the judges at the witch trials in Salem. I mean, yeah, this is how Puritanistic these people were and everything. This is a huge breakthrough. The very fact that they were contemplating communal living, that they were contemplating, you know, you know, like men and women had, you know, gender kind of
A breakthrough
transgenderism.
in terms of American thinking? Because it doesn't sound like a breakthrough in terms of a lot of European
French.
thinking.
No,
and
but
I know you
for-
made the comment that they're trying to escape.
Well,
you know.
remember, Americans
So-
were like very, and they still are, like very provincial.
Right.
And we still are. And American literature was like borrowing, I mean, it was like kind of interesting, but it was borrowing from like Europe a lot. It was borrowing from English literature and French, especially English. And it was, they felt very inferior. You know, those who had enough sense to feel anything about, you know, literature. So this was a very provincial country, especially by this time. It didn't have that flowing of the mind that, you know, Jefferson and you know, Franklin, where they were going back and forth between the continent and America. This was, you know, this
Who
was
big over. Come on, it's escaping me. The big French thinker.
Voltaire?
Yeah, that was one of them. And
He was
then-
much earlier though, right?
But
Well,
you know,
he
But
was
the
earlier,
French
yeah.
Revolution was already in its third
It
or
was,
fourth.
it was done.
influenced? Who was influencing? What's his head in his Paine?
Thomas Paine, yeah.
Yeah, but who
My next
influenced- no,
lecture
someone
will
over
talk
in
about
France,
Mhm.
Someone in France was influencing Paine. Paine was English. Same time as Catherine the Great. Who was that guy that was? He was an atheist.
that. They all were. Are you thinking of,
Oh, as soon as someone says it, I'm gonna smack myself.
I
for
know,
being
it begins
so
with an
stupid.
M. My gosh, I can't remember his name. He's very important.
Yes, thank you.
I
That
gave
keeps
a
out of my
lecture
head.
on him and it's gone right now.
But I mean, it sounded like his ideas were far. The
Yeah,
person
were
who we
further.
cannot name were far more advanced than
Yeah.
these.
Yes, they were.
But they were also prior to
But
this.
that had died out.
Okay.
You know, people weren't paying attention to that. This is
So-
New England.
Okay.
This is New England. It was like burning witches, or at least
Yeah.
trying to burn. Like certainly harassing them. And this is the land of Puritanism.
So if you confine it to the United States, it was
Yes.
unique to the United States.
Oh, very.
Okay.
And
That's
it
right.
was an
That's a good way to
American
put it,
philosophy.
Nora.
Yeah.
Very
Was
good
this
way to
happening
put
in
it.
any other parts of the country other than New England, or was this
Well, it
really-
had spread a little bit, but New England was the core of these great thinkers.
was that because it was also the core of learning?
Yes, it was a core of
Harvard?
intellectualism. You had Harvard there and everything like that. You also had like a heavy, and that remained for a long time, a heavy lecture circuit. I mean, in Louisa May Alcott's novels, people will talk about, well, mother will watch the children, or will we go to hear a lecture? This was entertainment to them. I mean,
The
they
Lyceum?
pardon?
Was the Lyceum
Yes.
part of the
Yes,
her life as
yes,
well?
yeah. It was all very important. The intellectual life was very important to them. But they also had a sense of like being, spiritual at the same time. But it wasn't this like loose, stupid spirituality that we have now that's very non-intellectual. These people
No,
were
but
highly
it sounded
intellectual.
very much like
Well,
they
it
were
does, but they
searching
were
for-
highly
we
intellectual.
Can't, we
Yeah.
can't totally reject
No.
this because we'll feel a gap in our lives.
They would.
I mean, I'm reading.
They
you're,
would.
Slap
As
on
you're
my side
naming
of it.
these authors, or I'm kind of looking. I'm perusing through a little bit of their bios and stuff, and their readings because you were pointing out some. So I'm
Yeah.
skimming, and a lot of them were. I mean, they refer to the. Gosh, what was he didn't say
Oversoul?
father? Well, yeah, I saw the
Yeah,
Oversoul.
that is
But
just
no, I mean, they
almost
made a
silly.
lot of what we would consider very Christian references
Yeah.
to a God, a father.
Well, so did the deists. So did Frank. You'll see in my next lecture next month that
Is that
it's
the
the
deists?
way it's the way they referred to providence, and that the fact that they called it providence and things like that, and how they differ from the Christians and how the Christians spoke of Jesus and what have you.
So am I just hearing this through my modern day lens? And I'm
Well,
not
remember,
thinking it
we
sounds
can't judge them by
Right.
their historical time
Yeah,
because they lived in it. It's just like people are going to think we were pretty
They were
silly.
bound in it.
Well, we are
But
pretty
at
silly.
the-
Remember,
Yeah,
these are people who were moving from God Almighty, omnipotent, so forth, and moving into the individual.
Yeah.
That you, the individual,
yeah.
are your own personal God,
Yeah,
which
thank
is
you.
the rejection of the whole biblical concept. It's gone. If you start thinking that way, you're separating yourself from a long tradition and oppression.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, I am my own God.
Yes.
I'm carrying it around inside me.
Absolutely.
And I am communicating, and I am
Yes.
communing with nature, so forth and so on, and I'm very self-reliant. So it's a big difference. This is a big step. Remember, you're in a society, now if you're going back there, in that society, the influence of the religious idea is all over. When you go shopping in the grocery store, the clothing store, anywhere you go in that society, you feel the influence of that religion. God be with you.
Yeah.
Just continuous.
And oppression. I mean,
And
sexual oppression, and these people, it's pretty great breakthroughs. I mean, you can't expect them. And, I think that some of the scholars are right when they say that those really heavy puritanical things kept them from, like, going really off the rails. too much. They
And
had
that's
been
in your
so
lecture,
imbued.
yeah. Mhm.
So they kind of kept a measure of moderation.
Well, and that might explain some of the language that they used in their writings. It seems to contradict this breaking away from religion.
Right, right.
Which sounded, I mean, their writing sounded
Well, the
very...
deists didn't totally break away from it either, but I mean, you know, these are all steps along the way, and I think it's important, you know, that we know about them instead of just my personal thing. I think everybody's tired of me hearing me say it, but you know, atheists don't know enough about their history.
How it all started.
And these were all steps along the way of our history.
Yeah.
And, you know, I like to pay tribute to these people. I mean, I certainly don't want to hear about the oversoul.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But, you know, it's like Foucault, the French writer, whom I'm very fond of, he liked the Stoics of ancient Rome, and they did believe in a kind of a providence, okay? So a lot of experts in that area asked him, like, well, you know, what do you think of their belief, you know, in a providence? And he said it was an excrescence, kind of like this tumorous kind of almost outgrowth that was not important. And you can almost think of, I think, this thing with the oversoul is an excrescence also from the Transcendentalists.
And the oversoul was...
You know, they were so fuzzy about it. I can't tell you. I think I read Emerson on it. I read other things on it, and both professors that I had in this area, they both kind of dismissed getting any kind of real concrete idea of the oversoul. It was some fuzzy, silly concept almost.
Is it God or is it man's soul?
It's God and man's soul. It's God, it's Brahma, it's like some kind of energy, life force.
They're putting out that what we hear today in spiritualism.
Yeah.
That was included in their discussion. There's a force. I know there's a force out there working on
Star
me.
Wars.
Yeah. Yeah, like Star Wars or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's aggravating to us as atheists to hear that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's
Well, actually, less aggravating is confusing because, like you said, I mean, you said it in your lecture, oh, what's that? And then I was looking, and every definition I looked at,
you know, that
it really
oversoul,
didn't make much sense.
that oversoul made no sense. Believe me, I read Emerson like about 5 times, his essay on it. And I said, whoa, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then I
Right.
found out it didn't make any
They
sense.
sense to a lot of people.
Okay,
I guess that they just couldn't leave it all behind.
right. Which is, I appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah.
It was a step or
Yeah, it's
one
a step
way
along the
to,
way.
That's right.
to get us to a more free-thinking type of thing. You also said, gosh, I just love my little note thing on here. It's so
You take
awesome.
notes on that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's
why
what I'm
she
doing.
likes it so much. She
So
stopped
then I could
using,
look online and
It's
cut
like a
and paste
she
notebook.
stopped
little-
using paper and pencil.
Yeah. Wasting paper.
Yeah.
No, you had, I'm on the last page. Where was the dates you'd said? I must have erased them. Shoot, I must have erased them. When you said was the age of, not atheism, free thought, the golden age of free thought.
Yeah,
What
that
the
was
years
about,
on
that was about, here, let me read it for you exactly.
I wrote it down,
So
but
that
I
I
copied
don't
over
have
the
it
back.
wrong.
It's
I
coming
haven't
very
perfected
soon.
my notes here.
It was, I want to get it exactly. It was
Oh, here it is,
about
1856 to
1856.
1914.
Yeah, 1914. And you'll find when you look it up that everybody has different dates for it. And if you read books on it, everybody has different dates.
But
So
this
that's-
seems to be past this transition.
Yes, it is.
So this was kind of like well, you're trying to make, you're making the argument that this helped
Oh,
usher
yeah.
in this golden
Oh,
age.
yeah.
This
And I
golden
mean,
age
of course,
free
the
thought.
golden age of free thought really harked back to Thomas Paine and Voltaire and things like that. But all these little movements.
Well, you said golden age in the
They
United
all
States.
reinforce.
Yeah, it was a
with
golden
the-
age in the United States.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how much of a step is it now? It's not that big of a step from direct theism. Direct theism into transcendentalism is an enormous step. And the next step, going into atheism, is less of a step that they had to take
I think you're right.
from theism to transcendentalism, transcendentalism is knocking on the door of atheism.
Yeah, it really is. I know it sounds silly,
Yeah.
but it's
It
close.
really is.
Were there
Yeah.
any atheists that moved through the transcendental movement that were written about?
Parker, I think, that I was just
Mhm, you
talking
mentioned
about,
that,
Parker
yeah.
was extremely close to that. When I was studying it, I think he was one of the people that came closest that we know of. I'm sure there were others,
Okay.
that weren't, like writers and thinkers, but, had adopted an atheism. They were very idealistic people.
The Unitarians of Emerson's day, the Unitarians of today recognize them as Unitarians? Did
I think that they were a little stricter because, it would depend on what kind of Unitarians, because most Unitarians reject the idea of Jesus as divinity. And for a long time, I think that they didn't allow him in the Council of Churches.
Well, you'd said
Unitarians
conservative
were not in the
Unitarians, which I
Council
thought
of
was kind of an oxymoronic.
Well, they had merged with the Congregationalists,
Oh,
and they, for a long, and also with the, who else had they merged with? The Universalists.
Unitarian Universalist.
Yeah, and if,
It was called at one
yeah.
That was much later.
Yeah,
Much later.
yeah, but you know what, it just depended, I mean, like Joseph Priestley, who was English, he had, they burned his house down and what have you in England, he discovered oxygen, he was one of the founders of Unitarianism, and he made his way to the United States. He did not believe in the divinity of Jesus, so you had a difference of opinion in Unitarians.
In the same movement.
And you still did when we were young, and we were in the Unitarian thing for our son's sake. And now they've become, of course, I don't want to be sued or anything. They've
You're
become,
pointing out into the
many
spiritual.
of the people have become very spiritual, and they've adopted Indian spiritualism and goodness knows what else.
so how was,
It was very atheistic when we were members.
okay, so it was not the same. You wouldn't recognize it today. to your
It
question.
depended. I mean, you could go to a congregation where the minister was more conservative.
It sounds like it's whatever
He wouldn't
they
believe
wanted
in
to-
Jesus'
wanted it to be.
divinity or miracles,
Yeah.
but he might be quite conservative about other stuff. So you had to kind of like move around. You had to find the
right minister,
yeah,
the right environment in the church.
Yeah, you really had to, because it would depend on the minister. But I'll tell you, when we first joined, we joined, and there was a slightly more conservative minister who had come from the East many years before, and he and his wife ultimately retired. And the new guy that came in that was more radical was a jerk. Cut all that, Jim. I don't want to be sued.
Yeah, we don't want to
But
digress
the more
too much.
conservative minister was really very good, and they had a very good Sunday school at that time.
So, the theme of self-reliance.
Yeah, that was really important to them.
Well, okay, and I'm a little baffled by that because this is pre-industrial.
Well, industry was starting.
Okay.
Industry was starting up, but like I said in my talk, it was invading the New England garden. And Emerson has a great poem where he is it in the middle or toward the end? He says, "Things are in the saddle." It's often quoted. Things are in the saddle. Things are in the saddle and ride mankind. We're not riding things anymore. They're
Things are
riding
riding
us.
us.
So they were very concerned about the commercialization of
So
society.
not too much different than us today.
No, but we
different.
all get caught up in it. But Louisa May Alcott's books are very much into rejecting a lot of wealthy frippery and things like that, and concentrating on important things. And
Family.
Yeah, family, charitable things, high-mindedness, reading good works. Producing plays on your own in your house, and they're very charming books, to tell you
Oh,
the
I
truth.
loved them.
Okay,
Yeah.
you loved them too.
No, I loved them too.
Okay,
No
I loved
argument.
every one of them,
Loved them too.
even the 8 Cousins and
Yeah.
Rose and Bloom and all of them. I mean,
All
I
of
was
them.
like a fanatic when I was a
Yeah,
kid.
agreed.
Yeah, she was
Go
a
ahead.
lovely
Your turn.
writer.
Do boys enjoy these books as well, or is it
Yes,
primarily a girl
I don't
literature?
think boys do.
I don't think boys enjoy books. Sorry, no.
Well, they enjoy Tom Swift and stuff, and that kind of thing, adventure books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think boys enjoy thoughtful books.
Not that age.
Unless, there's some boys
Yeah,
that, I
but-
shouldn't say that.
It's too socially mature for them to.
I think so, yeah,
Yeah,
and
the
it's not
themes of-
encouraged.
Those themes are more, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's-
I liked a good adventure book and Nancy Drew, and I
I
read
love
Hardy
Nancy
Boys.
Drew.
I
love
liked Hardy
Nancy
Boys
Drew.
just as much.
You know what? I didn't like the Hardy Boys. I love Nancy Drew. You know, I love these girls' books. And that, what was the nurse? Cherry Ames, I think.
I don't think I did that one.
Yeah, and then there were the like a series on a ballerina.
I missed that one too.
I loved all of them. And then I loved the slightly more mature books that some of the right, and I can remember like some of the nuns getting concerned when I was in Catholic school that I was reading too much of this kind of thing. And I'd say, but
Secularism.
sister, they're by Catholic writers, you know, and they'd go, they didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah, who's that guy that writes all those Catholic mystery books? Probably wouldn't count.
G.K. Chesterton.
Is it-
Is that who you're thinking
No, I was
of?
thinking Umberto, or was it Umberto? Whoever wrote the Catholic bunch of mysteries, I don't remember. But I have a question about back to the minimalist, or back to whatever it was.
Transcendentalist?
No.
Who is this?
The getting back to the land, the basics. What was the word? God, I just used the word a minute ago.
I can't. I don't know
Their
what you...
rejection of the industrial, the keeping the simple life.
Oh, I know. I
Oh, the
can't remember
farm?
what
I
you
just used
said.
the dang word a minute ago. I
Yeah.
flowed
God,
from my
what do
lips.
we all have? Like
Oh, yeah.
amnesia
No,
or
no, no,
something?
And now
But
it's
it
gone.
But it wasn't
But,
that significant. word.
Thoreau
Yeah.
on the Walden Pond. I was going to say
Yeah.
Golden Pond.
Well, he
Well,
was an extreme. He was an
Well,
extreme.
no. Well, let me back up for a minute
Okay.
because I remember, and I was trying to check it online, but then you were moving ahead, and I wanted to keep up. I remember everybody going on and on about Walden, the Walden Pond and all that, and then I remember at some point reading something that I was like, you weren't living out the land. I mean, he planted a small garden and he had people visiting from the city.
Well, he did, and he used to dine at the Emersons
He used
sometimes.
to eat at
Yeah,
the
he
Emersons.
yeah, he
really
went out.
did.
It's not
But
like
he did live. I mean, he lived pretty well on his own.
But he didn't grow his own food.
He
on
grew
that.
Yes, he did.
beans a
of it.
little bit, but I mean, he was basically, he went into town and bought supplies.
Well, sure. Yeah, he.
Got a
Well, he
haircut.
didn't.
I mean, my definition of
He-
living off the
Well,
land.
he didn't mean to. He didn't mean to live off the land like the Brook Farm people or Fruitlands.
Or
What
anybody.
he was
Yeah,
doing,
yeah.
he had retired to
He
like.
just wanted to go live alone in a quiet
yeah,
place.
so where he could write and contemplate and live
Which
richly.
is lovely, but I think that the way they portray
It's
him,
romanticized.
it's
Very
romanticizing
much so.
of what he did in this
Yeah.
this lifestyle. I can't
Well, he was a
remember the
very
name of it.
hard-headed man. I mean, he was.
But still, he
So
had
was
people.
Theodore Kaczynski.
He had people visiting him on, you listed, or I'm sorry, I was reading about all of the Dorothy, all these people came out to visit
Of
him.
course. Yeah.
I'm sorry, he wasn't roughing it that much. I mean, he wasn't Ben.
Well, he didn't go to.
Grizzly
He
Adams.
didn't really go to.
He wasn't
He
pulling a
didn't
Grizzly
go to rough
Adams.
it though. You
Yeah,
have to
but you're
understand.
thinking of someone who goes off to Montana.
But that's the way he was portrayed to us
Yeah.
in school.
Well, that's
Oh,
wrong.
that's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, he was some
No,
Grizzly
it's
Adams living
No,
off
no,
the land
no,
in
no.
his
No, all you have to
No,
do
no,
is-
that's
all you
a
have to
really
do is read the book
simplistic
and you
book.
would
This
know
was a
that.
very
That's why I didn't read it. Because I read this and I
But
was like,
remember
that's
now,
hypocritical.
remember all his life until he had TB, and he
Yeah,
had
TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reception was bad.
It's like, what?
But, no, I'm sorry they taught it that way. He was a great man, really.
Oh,
He-
it's my fault.
He
'cause
spent
I
a
just-
lot of time. He was a great naturalist, as his brother had been, prior to his death. So he spent a lot of time, like on various trips and everything. And he's got other books that he wrote, and these are specific things that are natural.
I think it was probably more I hear a word like we
He was
talked
a
reason
naturalist.
earlier.
Naturalist.
He was
I
a
heard, and
naturalist.
that one I would respond to.
Remember, he earned his living as a land surveyor often.
But I heard these words and I was like, but then they seem contradictory to
No.
my definitions, and I just rejected.
No,
I did that
and
a
I mean,
lot.
he had no intention of going out there and,
Like Grizzly Adams.
farming the North 40 or something. He
Okay.
was in the woods.
No, and
He was on a nice
he was a
little
writer,
cabin.
and if he were farming in the North Woods, cutting down the trees, pulling up the roots,
He wouldn't have time to write.
turning the soil.
He wouldn't be, like,
No.
faithful to nature even,
Right.
No.
He wrote beautiful things about nature, but he also wrote true observations. And I mean, people still read him for those things. Naturalists read him, people who are interested in the environment. And so he's really an important thinker, a huge amount of work, 20 volumes of his journals, a lot of things on his travels. And he kept going until his TB, like forced him to stop. To me, he was the best of them, although Emerson was,
Well, I'm
a great thinker.
You-
But
you
I
didn't-
like Thoreau better. But Emerson was quite civilized.
Did you read that biography of Thoreau?
I haven't, Norm,
Haven't
I wish I could,
that's
I
interesting.
wish I could read things, except for, I'm sorry. I will one of these days, I mean, doing a lecture a month is just, even every 2 months. Now I'm doing, Christian sexuality and how it differed from,
Well, that'll be a short lecture.
well, and I mean, one of my books is like several hundred pages, and the one I'm just starting now is 400 pages, and I had to read a really silly Roman novel to get an idea of the different sexuality versus, and I'm just overwhelmed with reading. Sorry to make excuses, but
Yeah, I mean, you
It's
can only do
overwhelming.
so much.
it's overwhelming. I
You know-
can't do any personal reading anymore,
You didn't talk a lot about Emerson, and he's actually considered to be the founder.
Right, I
Yeah,
was gonna say
he
that.
was.
He's the
I
founder.
wrote about him a lot, but I get carried away more by Thoreau because Emerson for some reason was just a little too respectable for me in the long run.
So how did he end up?
But he
making-
was a minister.
Oh, he had resigned
Yeah.
though.
Right.
So how did he make his living?
Lecturing,
Lecture circuit.
Lecturing?
the lecture circuit.
That's how important the lecture circuit
Yeah,
was.
it was very important.
People
remember,
made their
Who could make a
livings
living
from
at
it.
that?
remember
nowadays,
later on,
right.
Robert Green Ingersoll made a small fortune from the lecture circuit.
So there were larger audiences that these people were
People would,
influencing.
for Ingersoll, people would come from like all the way in the West to hear him, speak. It was incredible. They
That's
would like
amazing.
hitch up their wagons
But it
and
doesn't sound like this transcendentalist movement picked up a lot of. I mean, it certainly didn't flourish as a new religion movement, or I mean, it was just
no,
like
and it
this
died
short
out. But
intellectual
just
with a
think
small.
of the impact it had. Think of the impact it had on American letters.
Yeah, well, what was it going to become? It wasn't going to become a church.
No,
So what would it have become?
I don't know.
I think that was their problem. In order to spread this, you would have to have some kind of structure, and they didn't.
well, they didn't
They
because
were
they were too
rejecting structure.
individualistic. But I think that the influence was very strong. I mean, now everybody is like so, I don't know. We're all caught up in this commercial kind of society and
Oh,
conformism.
stop.
Well,
So why were you so attracted to this when you were in?
I was more idealistic when I was younger. I think I've become more corrupt as I've gotten
But what
older.
about this when you were idealistic?
Oh my
made
God,
you-
it
what were
just-
you drawn to?
Well, I was
I
drawn
mean,
to
other
the-
than the characters in, other
I
than these
didn't
people.
like the commercialism and the conformism of American society. I really didn't. And I used to just exult when I, met minds that explained things better than I could, that talked about, these greater, things. I often I wish I had kept those ideals more. In a way, this atheist scholar is kind of a project in my later life of getting back to some essentials, something I'm very dedicated to. But they thrilled me. Thoreau used to thrill me. When I used to read Walden, I used to just go insane.
There
I
was a.
admired him so much,
Are
and
you
I
fami-
think that was good.
Are you familiar with the play "The Night Henry David Thoreau Spent in Jail"?
I've never seen it, but
When I was a 12-year-old at I went to the community college to see that play.
you're kidding me, Darby. It's
Maybe it
so
was a field
good.
trip. I don't even remember. But yeah, it was all about civil disobedience, about the importance of standing on principle.
Yes.
And on the other hand, as a 12-year-old, it really didn't have a great impact on me. I remember it, but I didn't feel like I was terribly moved by it. It almost seemed like it was just commonplace because this was now 74.
This
So
is
I
when
felt
we
like,
had
well,
the great
yeah,
age. Yeah,
that's-
but
I see it all around me.
just think
But-
about what it was before.
I wasn't old enough to appreciate what he was doing.
Yeah.
Well, did you read the, do you get Skeptic, the magazine still?
No.
They recently had an article, they did a thing in there about whistleblowers and how, which is a form of civil disobedience in a sense, because you're standing up against
Yes.
the right?
Yes.
Right.
Well, you're standing up against people doing the wrong thing, or, even though you may be in a corporate structure, not a governmental structure, but it's still taking a risk, it's standing up for. So to me, it's still civil disobedience in a sense.
It certainly
But it talks
is.
about the whole thing about, how all of the big ones that should be heroes are not. They can't find jobs, or and why, and it goes into the whole psychology of why, and I'm just wondering.
Well, I can remember one of the people that was, I think he was in the Clinton administration, but he wrote a piece in the New York Times, and he just condemned whistleblowers as being disaffected, and they weren't idealistic, and they had no, like, principle really. But they were like, it was a very nasty little op-ed
And that was
piece.
something that they brought up in this article. They talk about, that it's seen as a negative thing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so the woman who blew the whistle on Enron, and all, those are not negative things.
I don't
those
think
are
so
like
either.
heroes.
Yeah,
but
I
to
think
other
that they are
people,
too,
they're
but
not perceived
see,
as
this
loyal.
is the thing.
They're not. So, but then civil disobedience, you're not loyal to your country. You're not loyal to something if you stand up and go against the.
Exactly.
And I'm just, but it's scary as hell to me.
But wait a minute.
It's standing.
There's always some other ulterior motives as well.
Not always,
Deep
no.
Throat, WikiLeaks, Snowden. These people had a grudge.
I don't think so, Norm. I think that they're heroes.
Maybe they did have a grudge.
They're my
So
heroes.
what?
Deep Throat.
Well, the grudge would
he
be.
didn't get an appointment.
Yeah, did they expose skullduggery?
They did. They
Thank
served
you.
a great. Yes, Jim, you're right. They
They
served
did
a greater
expose
purpose.
skullduggery.
But on the other hand, if you romanticize them and put them on a pedestal, I think that's also far from the truth.
Well, and some of the whistleblowers weren't. They went out of their way to blow in a big way the whistle. You agree? Some of the ones that you look at, I mean, the Enron, she was not seeking those emails and everything got made public. She didn't make them public.
No.
They went out. I mean, so she was recognized, but then she still was rejected as.
I know.
And people say things like, "Well, what was her? She sour grapes."
Yeah, I know. They always
Or
say that,
what's
but
her
it isn't
problem?
always
She's
true.
not. And it's like, but it's
not always
okay,
true.
now
Norm.
here-
It's maybe complex.
It's
It may be
That's what I'm
complex,
saying.
but what
That's
you
what I'm
just
saying.
said
It's
is that
very-
I should never stand up and speak out against something I see wrong
No.
because somebody's always going to look at me and say, "Oh, well, there must have been something in it for her."
Well, that's the trouble.
And
See, we become
marginalized.
so cynical.
Yes, and that's just to me.
We're too cynical. I mean,
Too cynical.
we
Okay.
maybe have a
Terrifying.
complex range of motives, but the thing is
because you could just resign. You could just walk away.
yeah, but
and
you
then
want
you're
to
blamed for
expose
being
it.
German in World War II. Oh, well,
Well,
you could have stood up and done something. Well, I did.
That's
I
not
left
what
the
I'm
country.
arguing. No, but that's not what I'm arguing.
But I mean,
I'm saying, corporate corruption or even government corruption, you could walk away from and say,
Yeah,
I'm not going to
but
be a
is
part of
that
it.
right?
But
I
you-
mean,
how
I
do you
would
want-
probably be afraid. I mean, really, I think it would be very frightening to take on the government the way some of the people.
and actually,
do.
that's what a lot of people do in the article. They do walk away.
Yeah.
But how does that then solve any problems
Yeah,
or
it
help the next person who just got
No.
flamboozled, lost all their
Right.
money, got this?
Yeah, yeah.
How is that an act of any kind of?
Yeah.
It's very selfish.
It's well, but this actually that's why the article was fascinating.
Well,
because it
that's
talked
why
about the
those poor
psychology of
people that
selfishness and-
worked in the Veterans Administration, the intake, they had a lot of guts. The ones that admitted finally that what they had been forced to do.
Yeah, actually, they did.
Yeah, I mean that takes a lot of nerve, and they were penalized. It's turning out that they were.
Oh,
that
I'm
they
sure
were
ha-
doing- yeah,
oh, yeah.
it's turning out that they did nasty things to them,
No
transferred
doubt.
them to worse places,
Yep.
and
You
et
do
cetera.
not win, and that's tragic.
Well, you don't
There's
win.
no reward for doing
Nurses,
the right
some
thing.
nurses that
But why
have
should
given
there
up,
be?
Okay,
the
that is a
hospital.
reward, but do you have to be punished?
Yeah,
Can you just have a neutral
no, you
outcome?
can't.
But if
Some
there's no
nurses that
absolute
have
morality-
turned in doctors and stuff at hospitals, they still have trouble getting employment.
Yep, they're black. Yeah, I mean
Blacklist.
those are the kind,
They're
and
on the
that's scary
blacklist
to me.
forever. So you think about that, and I think a lot of us take the easy way out. And I don't know if I were ever faced with that, what I would do, quite honestly. I hope I would do the right thing.
Do you know the British TV series The Prisoner?
Oh, that's terrific.
That is a little bit about what we were talking
There,
about. Where he's
see?
a secret agent, but he knows that the people he's working for are very corrupt and bad. So he resigns from his job, but they won't let him resign.
Yeah.
So instead, they take him prisoner and put him on this island. They will not let him leave, hence the name.
It's
Wow.
like this
Oh,
village,
that's
Creepy.
Yeah, you would enjoy that.
It's a village. You
just
would
a-
enjoy
Scary
it. It's a village.
a
And
one-year
it's very.
series
It's a
in
lot of
Britain in
fun.
1969. It was really a good time.
Gotta love the Britons. Their series are so much
The
shorter.
Prisoner
than
is
ours. You can
fun,
actually
and
just-
a lot of the episodes are on YouTube, or where are they?
Yeah.
trying to
Well,
remember
you
where
can
the
rent them.
episodes
I
are.
don't know whether they're on YouTube.
They
or
might
not.
be on.
Well, you can rent them. You can rent them.
Netflix or
It's
something.
they're fun. They're a lot of
But
fun.
I mean, he was raising
So
that same
the-
issue of what is the responsibility of the whistleblower, and in order to get on with their lives, you know, what do they have to do?
You don't really get on with your life
Yeah.
after that happens.
Well, you know, one of the things that the lesson I learned many years ago about that, and even I didn't read Civil Disobedience, but when you studied people like Gandhi or any of these people, one of the things that just kind of resonated for me is that the only way you can really pull it off is if you have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Meaning, you don't have family. So if
Yeah.
you lose your job and the worst that happens is you don't get to, you know.
Well, see, this is the trouble.
And
the
that's
problem.
and so guess what? Never had kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of lived that way. My dad instilled in me, if you want any control over your life, live below your means,
He's
so you
right.
can walk away, so your employer does not own you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, these are things that are
Yeah.
deeply ingrained in me.
Wow.
He was a smart man.
Yeah, except for the fact that even with all that, there's still so much to lose when
Yeah.
you know if you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because then you don't have a means of livelihood at all.
You have to reinvent yourself. I
Yeah.
mean, but even when you have nothing to
But
lose,
when
you
you
still
have
have something
when
to
you
lose.
have kids, you know what? Wasn't it Shakespeare? Who said that? Who said that you have then they're hostages to fortune,
Right.
and you know you can't act then as well. Although some people still do, but it's very hard.
Well, getting back to our topic, apparently Mr. Alcott did because he went on with his schools that didn't flourish. They
Well, he
broke,
was
and yet he
just-
had all these children.
Yeah, he was just he was like totally impractical, you know.
Did they write about sex? Anything about sex? or
Well,
sexual
Margaret
fun?
Fuller did a little bit, but
Yes,
you
I
know,
bet.
Thoreau might have even been a virgin. Nobody really knows for sure about him. Emerson, was he had a couple of wives at least. And he kind of sounded like he liked sex. I remember in some of his essays, but they didn't write about it to a great extent.
So it was still a taboo that they weren't
Yeah.
going to break.
Yeah, well, you notice Brook Farm. They didn't do those experiments in living that you'll see when we discuss like just preceding like anarchism.
Because
Yeah,
I remember
then
there
you'll
was
see.
some kind of free love commune. Am
There were.
I
but
repeating a slander though, or was this part of
these
transcendentalism?
people, it was just slander. It was slander.
Just
These
slander.
people never did anything like that. Believe me, they were so New England Puritan.
But
Still.
you're saying the free love came before that?
Yeah, there was a group before that. I'm trying to remember the name of them. They're in a future lecture, and then also there was a lot of like free love type thing around the just preceding World War I. Emma Goldman, and all that group. But yeah, there was an early free love commune.
I thought the pre-Raphaelites had some free lovers in them.
Yeah, they did, but they were English.
They
Remember?
were always.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, they weren't they weren't American, yeah. And they weren't as loose as they were reputed to be either.
So even corporal punishment, that was a very early opposition.
Yeah, and that was important too, because people didn't like that at all, especially a lot of the parents. People didn't even understand
Spare the
that.
rod, spoil the child.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading about some of the school practices he did, and they're not too radical
Well,
today,
you know
that's
this
for sure.
Detroit case, where the child was apparently abused, what's his name?
Which
Charlie.
Detroit case?
Yeah, I know, Charlie Bothell or whatever. There were commentators on, and some of them were like angry that the father was being, was being threatened with, prosecution and stuff, because they said that they had been brought up with corporal punishment.
Yeah, but
Sometimes-
not with a pipe.
Well, I think then they realized it, but they were quite angry. They were
This is
going,
the-
well, once in a while you have to swat your kids and you have to give them a spanking. So this is going on today even.
With a plastic pipe.
The
Yeah,
boy
well,
in the
no,
basement. This was the boy in the basement.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it
and
was
he
so
was,
awful.
they found a PVC pipe. He was
Yeah,
sitting
yeah.
Yeah, he's Charles V.
Charles Bothell V, yeah.
Of course.
in. Isn't that terrible?
Yeah, it was
The
horrible.
Oneida community.
Oneida, they were free lovers.
I don't believe, were they free
But that
lovers?
That's what it says right
Okay,
here.
That
then
was
it's true then.
Not
Okay.
transcendental.
Okay,
No,
no, they
but
were not
this was-
transcendental.
But they made the pottery,
Yes,
right?
and they made the silver, I
The,
think.
the
Yeah,
silver,
Yeah,
silver, not pottery.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting.
John Humphrey Noyes. He was the
yeah, that's right, I
He
forgot
were-
about them.
he's repudiated to have come up with the term free love. And this was in the early
No,
1800s.
you have some more questions.
I'm just
Your
looking,
Things are interesting.
Yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
looking through here, I'm trying
You
to.
ask them, I'll field them here.
So you said something disappointing. You said Thoreau actually favored Brown's actions?
yeah, he really
Yes.
was. Well, you know, people make mistakes. Foucault, you know, whom I love dearly, for a while, it was, you know, thought that the Iranian Revolution was cool because it released, you know, all these, you know, forces of, I don't know, for freedom and what
What an
have you.
idiot.
He later changed his mind. He was very good at admitting when he was wrong. But, you know, we're not always right when we take positions.
Because sometimes
But
history, you know,
if
20,
you were to-
20 past vision.
He's
I mean,
human, and remember, they
Yeah.
really hated the slavery.
But you see, it's one thing to hold up civil disobedience and say, well, you know, this is the landmark, and then you tell me the same guy.
Well, you know
Favored
why?
violence.
Because they were so enraged with the slavery and
But
the
that-
new laws were worse. The new
Disappointing.
federal.
I didn't know that, and it certainly didn't come out in the play.
It's a small thing about Thoreau. You know, see, I wanted to like
See, but
be a
that
balance,
darkens
give
it.
a balance.
I'm glad you did. No, I'm glad
But
you pointed
didn't
out.
did he feel that way forever?
You know, I'm not sure. I think it just kind of the issue died down, and he was ill. So I don't think it became.
Because
a
this was
real-
towards the end of his life when,
Yeah.
when Brown,
Yeah,
he killed the people at the ferry,
yeah.
and you're saying that Thoreau supported that action?
Well, yeah, kind of, yeah, because it was really the point of that it was okay to use force to like get rid of these people that were using force on the slaves. Remember, it was a horrible institution.
Well, I know that.
I'm not having the same outrage you are because I'm just thinking to myself of the horrific things they did.
Yeah,
And I mean, at some point you stand up and these are a bunch of people that were supporting it, agreed with it, were
Yeah.
part of it.
well,
At
they
what
were slave
point-
owners. They
That's
were
what I'm
slave
saying.
owners. Yeah.
So
same.
at what point are you like, well, wait a minute, why should I be the only one, tortured, suffering?
But Brown really was a religious fanatic. He
Yeah,
was
yeah,
probably
he
a
was a
little crazy. He was a
nutcase.
little crazy. Yeah.
He was a nutcase. I
Yeah.
agree. I'm just
Yeah.
saying.
But yeah,
Sometimes-
you can be driven to it, and I
Yes.
think that
And that would be an example.
Yeah.
If he was a slave himself, I think I'd be a little more inclined to be
yeah.
feeling
Yeah,
him.
well, there was that slave revolt. What was the guy's name? He did it.
the one they did the movie about.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Amistad.
Wasn't
No.
it Nathan
That
something?
wasn't
No.
the slave revolt film, but I know what you're talking
It
about.
But
was a small revolt.
Nat
Nat Turner?
Turner. Maybe that was
Maybe,
it.
yeah.
Nat
Maybe
Turner.
that was
It was a
Nat
small
Turner,
slave
yeah.
revolt, yeah.
Yeah.
Nat Turner's,
Yes,
Yeah,
Nat
yeah,
Turner.
not Amistad.
No,
No,
I said it
no,
wrong.
I'm
I was
sorry.
coming up with names.
That's
Nat
it.
Turner.
Yeah, Nat Turner, yeah.
I saw.
Yeah. That's the one I think I'd be more
Yeah,
inclined
yeah,
to.
yeah, because
be
you know,
sympathetic
the
toward his
blood
techniques.
boils, I mean, and the rage overtakes you
Right.
sometimes.
No,
so,
I know it was a bad example because John Brown was a nutcase.
yeah.
These pamphlets that you mentioned, are these still extant, or are there still
That's a good
copies,
point.
or-
There probably are, actually, yeah.
What pamphlets?
Probably some of them.
All of these.
Well, these are the kind of
pamphleteers.
things that if you were, you would issue pamphlets
Not
on
just
your
the
point
dial,
of view.
They were like little essays.
Yeah,
Literally a pamphlet.
yeah,
stapled
yeah.
together.
They were like little, I
A
think
pamphlet
that
could
one.
even be considered a fold over.
A
Yeah.
photo over.
Yeah.
I
And they
think-
would hand them out to their friends, just
Yeah,
like we would do.
Yeah,
today.
and to
Or
other
get
people.
a young man in the city to take them around, distribute them.
So would we still be able to read these?
Oh,
You know,
they're in
you probably
collections.
could. That's an interesting question, but
I mean,
I'm
are
sure
they still
that there.
extant?
I'm
That's what I
sure that
asked.
there
They're
are
in
some.
libraries. I
I'm
think
sure
if you-
that there's some.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because
Oh, yeah.
Gale is
Archives,
scanning a
yes.
lot, from the 18th
They probably
century.
have scanned those.
So if they've scanned them, then
Well.
the libraries should subscribe to the
It'd be
online.
interesting to.
Here's apparently what
We
seem
could
to be
search.
the complete anthologies of the Dial from Google Books.
There
volume
you
two,
go. Yeah,
three,
that's
one,
the
There
two,
you
dial.
are.
Yes.
And then search for the word atheist in there and see what they had to say about real atheists.
Well, you know, I don't know, actually, I don't know what they said about real atheists. Remember, they were called German atheists by
Yeah,
some
But
people.
would,
It's a
I mean, they would
term
have to
for-
reconcile that accusation that they were atheists. They would have to respond and say,
Let's
this
see.
is why we're not atheists.
Yeah, I would think, actually, I don't know that they did, but you know, there were those pamphlet wars
Mm-hmm.
where they would like, you know, argue with each other on these notions. Remember, they hadn't really gotten into atheism. They weren't really there yet.
But you'd think they'd have something to say about it.
Oh yeah, I'm
Is
sure
that
that
what
they
you're kind
did,
of
but
going
you know, I never.
Exactly, they would have something to
Actually,
say
I've
about
never come
why.
across it. I've never come across it, but then I'm not an expert in this
Yeah.
area. I read a lot of Emerson. I read a lot of Thoreau.
Well, apparently you can read the entire dial and all of them on here if you want.
For some reason, I don't think I really want to read the whole guy.
And
I think Thoreau was their most distinguished writer.
the Brisbane associations, or associationism,
Yeah,
did you say 16 members or 60 members?
he wanted 1,260 members in each phalanx.
1,260?
Yeah, in
Yeah,
each
to live in
one.
this huge building.
Yeah, yeah. There'd
One
be,
building?
Yeah, everybody
But
would.
they
There'd be
would
different
go out
buildings.
and farm, and the outer buildings would have the workshops in them and so
Yeah.
forth. And
Yeah, I think he thought that it would work, you know, I mean, so I guess what Brook Farm was trying to do was, have one phalanx to begin with. Maybe they thought that they could spread, you know, but of course, it all died, poor people. You know, here's the other thing too, you know, you have to remember that these people that went out there, a lot of them were like intellectuals. And
Yeah, they weren't
thinkers
farmers.
and stuff. You know, if you want to start something like that, you have to be willing to like do
It's
hard
like why
manual
it's
labor.
amazing we're here today, considering everybody that came over on the boats in the first place
Yeah.
were like, we're not going to farm this land.
Yeah, yeah.
Waited for provisions to feed them.
Well, they had a lot of indentured servants and things. that
Well, no,
helped.
Jamestown almost died out because
Yeah.
they didn't want to. They didn't want to
It
eat
did.
the. They
It
didn't
did
want to
die
eat
out.
the stuff. It did.
Yeah.
Starved to death.
Yeah, because they wouldn't eat
Yeah.
those things. The Indians were like, these things are potatoes. I think was what was one some.
I
common
think they
food
thought
to
it was
eat.
poisonous or something.
Yeah, they had all these
Is that
super.
right?
And
yes.
I think they thought that tomatoes were like poisonous,
Some
like
for
very
years.
devilish.
Oh yeah, all sorts of
Uh,
common
poison.
foods that were
Yeah,
very
it was
healthy.
like
They refused to touch, and
Superstitions about
they
food.
refused to work. They didn't know how to farm.
Yeah.
They starved.
Yeah,
Wow. There was this back to the land movement in the late 60s
yes,
as well.
and a lot of those went to
And,
by the
yeah,
board too,
Deborah's mother-
for the same reason.
The same thing, you know, Deborah's mother bought, and father, they bought 80 acres outside of Lansing. They were professors at the university at MSU, and they bought 80 acres and did almost nothing with it. You know, it was almost completely wild. Certainly by the time I saw it, it was entirely wild. But she had this fanciful idea that they were gonna grow vegetables or whatever, you know.
So you have to get
80
down there
acres.
and work.
Yeah, and then you realize how hard it is. It was a complete fiasco in terms of what they had planned, because she realized how hard it was going to be.
This
And being a professor at the university, it was just ridiculous.
it's quite.
what you have to have with something like that is, if you're a professor at the university, you have to have an overseer.
Yeah.
Someone who's there 24/7 taking care of the place. And you go out on the weekend and you pretend on
Pretend
your
that
track.
you're
Yeah.
actually farming.
Now, see, my
We knew a lot of people that
father-in-law-
left from commune. We knew a lot of people at that time that were in the communes, and they
Yeah.
lasted sometimes not even a year. Go ahead. I'm sorry. You wanted
No,
to
that's
say
all right.
something.
My father-in-law, they had family land that was way up in frickin' Canada in the middle of nowhere, and they farmed. He kept bees. They did all that stuff, and they both worked full-time jobs.
Well, that's incredible.
Wow.
I mean, she was a nurse and he was a biology
Well,
teacher.
there is.
Mhm.
We know a couple that I don't know if they're still doing it. We don't know them real well, but we had met them at friends, you know, mutual friends parties
Mhm.
and stuff. And they're both professors, but he was working his own small farm too. He really loved it.
Mhm.
Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be done, but you know, he had experience as a
Yeah,
child.
my father-in-law grew up as
Yeah.
a farmer. His father was a
Yeah,
farmer.
and
so,
so,
yeah, he grew
so
up
this
as a
guy
farmer.
loved doing it. I
Yeah, how
can't
to
see
do and
teaching
when to do it.
all day
Kids
and
hated
writing
it, though, 'cause they were
articles and
stuck
then
in the
working
middle
the
of
farm.
nowhere.
I wouldn't even think about doing
No.
it. Jim and I did a little garden once.
Oh my God.
I mean, that enough. You're stuck at home all
I
summer.
I was like,
You
what?
weed for a week, the darn
I've
thing
got to
dries
weed
out
this
and dies.
thing?
I know.
Yeah.
I love my garden, but at the same time, it's an incredible amount of work.
Yeah, I don't.
Just
we
a
don't
home
keep. I
garden.
haven't kept a garden in like about 40 years, just
and the
because
rabbits
it's like.
came and ate all our.
Yeah.
So
We
that
had
was-
pumpkins, I
Boy,
guess.
did they
and a
move
few
high.
things. I just could not.
Yeah,
It's
it-
horrible. I couldn't do it. Yeah, it's really an investment of time. And
Yeah, they have a
work.
whole bunch of writing in here about the divine presence in nature
Yeah.
and in the soul.
Yeah, but see,
Yes.
that's like that correspondence that we're talking about. Yeah.
These ideas sound very familiar if we're aware of Spinoza.
Yeah.
And it kind of rings a bell there. It kind of rings a bell with Lucretius,
Yeah, a little
whose
bit.
ideas were floating around even at now
Although
at
I
that
think
time.
Lucretius was harder headed than that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
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 It was less romantic about it.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
rings a bell with Kant,
Mm-hmm.
and it rings a bell with a lot of
Yeah.
European thinkers.
Oh yeah.
It takes a long time to get away
For
from religion.
ideas to move along.
Yeah, I just don't want to make them out as some exceptional, they were incremental, they were not exceptional in that way.
Well, that's
In
why I
that way.
tried
They
to
were
say that
exceptional
they
in
were
other ways.
step along. Yeah,
Yeah.
that they were
Which way
step
would you
along
say they were
secularism.
Oh, I mean, the Margaret Fuller and her attitude about women should. She was against the
Wow.
current property laws.
Yeah.
She fought those. She got women together to talk about women's issues. I mean,
Yeah.
she was.
Mhm.
That's very
Yeah, you're right. And
important, and you
you
Yeah,
said
that she even gave him a chance to have a voice.
yes.
She,
I mean,
Make
she,
sure you speak.
she interviewed the prisoners about chastity,
Well, her friend did.
her friend, but why would they pick prisoners? Because that's people that
yeah,
might-
what's that have to do?
I suppose that's a lot of women that would talk about it.
That
Maybe they were
they
prostitutes.
would speak about
Maybe
it.
that's
Yeah,
why they
most
were
likely,
prisoners.
yeah.
Well, they were,
Okay.
they would, they were women that would probably be more open about
Just
it. I
speak.
mean, what were you gonna say to
Yeah.
your like next door neighbor who was like a good Unitarian or Congregationalist or Puritan
Not
or
very
whatever?
far
like,
with that
and when
interview.
you lost your chastity, did you
Yeah.
feel ruined? I mean, she'd probably faint.
Yeah, I understand.
See, they had to talk to somebody about it, and these women were probably more open. And that's right, some of them probably were prostitutes.
Because if you were in jail as a woman at that time, what would it have been for?
Well, it could have been too for like
Stealing.
robbery,
Could have been.
Pickpocket.
embezzlement,
Although women
murder,
weren't in
even
many
maybe some of
positions
them
to have-
had committed murder.
I'm guessing it was more. They were just poor.
Yeah, that's another thing too, yeah.
I was there
yeah.
for
Speaking of your sexuality thing, and the women's movement and everything, what was the treatment? What was the name of the thing? Hysterical. The doctors basically induced orgasms.
Oh,
in
wasn't
women
that
as far-
wild?
Which like vibrators.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like a doctor's tool, and they called it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was to relieve.
That's incredible.
hysterical
And when I read
something
about
and-
that, I was quite amazed.
Well, I think I firmly.
It did.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, people expected doctors to do that, so to release the
And I
woman's
firmly believe
energy.
though, but remember back then there was the consensus was
Yeah.
there was no female or all that stuff didn't exist.
Yeah, but the
orgasm, that kind
doctors
of
knew
thing.
it. And
Well, I don't know if they
Precursor
knew it as
was
much
there.
as they thought they keyed into something.
something,
Yeah.
something that worked.
Maybe some of them
Yeah.
did, but
That was the 1890s, that was much later, right?
Yes.
That was the-
Yeah,
the
but there was
electricity
a doctor that went to prison for that not too long ago, about 10, 15 years
as
ago.
well he should have.
He had been doing some kind of manipulation, women that had vaginal pain, apparently, and apparently, it was unclear to me, but he was insisting that he had read it was a method that he had read about. It was definitely written
I read
about.
about that.
No, but I mean,
yeah.
it was really written about, but he would like, I don't know, like massage,
The G-spot.
yeah, for a long time, and then
Okay.
he kept insisting that, oh no, Virginia did not have an orgasm. It was just spasms.
Right.
And that's all. And it's too bad that she didn't understand this, and but he did have to serve a sentence. I think 5 or 6 years in jail for
Good.
doing it. Yeah, a lot of people finally brought him to justice, but I think he was doing about the same thing.
Sounds like it.
crazy time.
Now, there can be vaginal pain with dryness as you get older, past,
I'm pretty sure my doctor doing a stimulation
Well, I
exercise
mean, they wouldn't
is
do
not on
that,
my
they'd
list
give you
of therapies.
Premarin or some kind of,
Right.
something, but, yeah, but I mean, I don't know if these women had, some of them were rather young, so
Was
I
it
would
that
think
far
probably it
because
was,
I was wondering if that was anything.
it was
that
probably psychosomatic on their part, they were younger women, I'm not
They
sure.
were fascinated by electricity. They thought that electricity could be used to treat lots of different things.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
And then somehow the idea that you could get this electrical device to vibrate, I'm not sure. how exactly
yeah, that's so
magnetic-
funny.
accidental.
Then you would, apply it as first as a massager, and that's what they were sold as. They were sold as
Yeah.
massagers, not
They
as
still, a
vibrators.
lot of them still are.
They
A lot of them
still
still
are.
are. They're not vibrators. They're not massagers, or they're not called
So there's a play.
They're not Steely Dan's.
yeah,
If you're
yeah.
interested, there was a play that came out a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, about this phenomenon that was happening in the early, the turn of the century. It's a period play about this.
There
one
was
of
a
these
book
doctors.
about it, which I
Really?
didn't have time to
Yeah,
read.
if you're
That's
interested,
a
I
crazy
can
ass
look it up.
play.
Yeah, there was a good book about it, but I didn't have time to read it. It was very well reviewed.
This was the same time circumcision became popular as
Yeah.
well. They had a lot of
Yeah.
quacky ideas.
Yeah,
Some of them were very harmful,
yeah.
and this one happened to be less harmful.
It seemed to work. I wonder what those women thought. A lot of those women have probably never had an orgasm.
Well,
I mean, because, sex with the men a lot of times was very brutal from what I've read about what Emma Goldman and the different people that were for women's liberation and for, birth control and stuff. A lot of these women were just experiencing a legalized rape almost. The men were very brutal and, then they would bear children and it was really awful. Especially with the working women.
aren't we lucky we're where we are today?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder.
No, we are lucky, yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Well, we probably are, yeah, with all the problems that have arisen as a result of everything. But so some of those women must have, I wonder when they had an orgasm, what they felt like.
They felt like what their doctor told them to feel like. Their hysteria was gone and they were calmed down and they went home
Time to
happy
go home.
like a
I'll
value.
go home.
But without any education, you're saying that they wouldn't have figured out that this is actually what sex should be like?
I think some of them probably never did. Maybe some of them did and kept their mouths shut.
Oh, I'm sure a lot of people did. I mean, there's plenty of.
Maybe it stimulated some women to actually go on and have orgasm if their husbands were halfway nice to them in bed. You never know what happened later when they went home, Sometimes when, a woman has a first orgasm, then obviously it's a lot easier to have them after that.
I would be fascinated to read something about what actually happened, but I doubt that that's something that was discussed. That's why I was thinking back to Margaret Fuller. I wonder if any of the stuff, how deep they got into these discussions. I wonder if there's records of any of the
Or
conversations.
Yeah,
Well,
private letters.
she
In the
had a
ladies'
very,
group?
it's obvious that she had an infatuation with this young married woman who was very beautiful, and they would share the same bed, and, she would stroke her hair, and but, they kept it at that level.
Well, that's what we.
Well,
that's what they
I'm pretty
say.
sure that they did, I mean, that would have been too far to go.
Who would have known?
Well, who would have known, I know, but I don't think she would have written about it then, like that. I think it was really very platonic. It was charming in its own way.
No, it's sad.
If she was a lesbian, then it's kind of sad if she
Yeah.
hadn't.
Well, I don't think she was. She really got it on with that Italian aristocrat.
Oh yeah, the
that
dude
was-
she married and ended up dying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they really got it on. In fact, there is some doubt of whether they were actually ever married, really, or because they had to be in hiding a lot because these Mazzini's followers were being hunted down, so they were in very dangerous territory there. But I mean, they would, if they weren't married, they would have gotten married when they hit the States. I mean, they were, but I don't think that she might have been a little bisexual,
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
A
which is
little.
not unusual.
No.
I mean,
Norm, you have anything else?
No, thank you
What?
very much.
Reese?
You run out of questions?
If anybody wants to borrow my course. my,
Yeah, guys, you have
audio
all
course
those questions. Norm has a
Nikisha
course right up
Companies.
there.
Somewhere on Transcendentalism. they cover, a lot of what Mary has covered here, but,
Well, a lot more thoroughly, I'm sure that's
A
a
few-
really great ground.
maybe 6
Actually, I'm
hours.
quite satisfied with my little dose of it. I feel like I at least semi-understand it now.
Yeah.
Whereas before I was just like,
Yeah.
what is that wacky?
Well, that's
But
what
I
I'm trying
was
to do.
right.
I'm trying to fill in people on things that kind of are at least leading to secularism, and then I have references, and you always know you can go beyond that if you're interested in a particular topic.
And I was right though. By today's standards, it's kind of a fuzzy spiritualistic kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
By today's standards.
Yeah.
And where is the manifesto for this movement? I didn't get one book.
Well,
that
their own books were manifestos. Remember, they were very individualistic, and that's why I warned several times during my lecture.
Yeah.
There really wasn't.
That's why you had to look at individuals.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I believe this and you believe that. I mean, like Emerson was like a lot more civilized, even though he was an individualist, than say Thoreau. Thoreau was probably the most individualistic.
Okay.
And then the Brook Farm people, they were really more
Communal.
yeah, in social, trying to work out social experiments.
It's just hard to put it together under one umbrella called Transcendentalism. I mean, it became so vague or so splintered that you would hardly call it a movement.
Well,
It was, and then it splintered and went away, and that's
the
the whole
trouble.
thing,
It was
right?
a very short movement, but
Listen
in
how
terms
short
of
that
American letters, and how it influenced radical movements later, it's incredible when you think it was like a very kind of small group of kind of rarefied people, and a very actually it was a pretty prolific outlet of output of literature. It's really important. It's some of the best literature around. I mean, that period, remember, everybody was grappling with those things in the transit. So you have Herman Melville's works, you have Nathaniel Hawthorne's. I mean, until we hit Hemingway and whatchamajiggy. Jeez, tonight I'm really
James?
crazy. Come on, everybody, The Great Gatsby.
Oh, Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald. Until you hit those
You
writers,
have American
you don't have really great American literature.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that was it. I mean, when we hit that period, it's all of a sudden, we divorced ourselves from Europe. And,
Big breakthrough.
I was a lit major, so this is important to me. I'm probably more important than it is to you guys, but just think about it. We were like relying on Europe and we felt inferior, and then all of a sudden we wrote some of the best literature in the world. In the whole effing world. I mean, and in that small period of time, I mean, and great thought. I mean, Melville, like, wrestling with the idea, was nature evil? Was it indifferent? Was
Poor
it?
Melville. He
He
died. He never even knew that book made that. They dug that out of
No,
the.
that was not a
After
success.
the
Some of
fact.
his earlier books were
Oh,
much
he was
more
very
successful.
successful.
Yeah.
And then he wrote
Yeah.
that and thought it was, who was he influenced by that he eventually got mad as hell about because he influenced, it was Thoreau, wasn't it?
I know, I think it was probably Hawthorne. He and Hawthorne had
Maybe
their
it was,
problems.
yeah, you're right, it was
Yeah.
Hawthorne.
Well, Hawthorne said about Melville, and I thought that was very good. He said he couldn't believe in God and he couldn't not believe in God, and he was satisfied with neither.
But he told
Position.
Melville that he should write this great American, he should get away from the stuff that was making
Yeah.
him money,
Yeah, I know, I know.
that it was earning him a living.
Well, it was hard for him because
and then he writes this
he
big
had-
thing and he dies in poverty.
well, he had mental problems also, and it was very hard for him to write. He wasn't one of these writers that just sits down and does like
Actually, that reminds me of a
7,000,
question.
8,000 pages a day, or practically. He used to like sometimes just almost with aversion sit down. It was very hard for him. And
Well,
yet
so it was a huge, I mean, he still loved what he did, he was just kind of
he
like,
didn't
wait.
always love it. And then he
No,
wrote
I mean,
a lot of,
he liked
yeah.
that piece of work he did. He thought
Yeah.
it was good.
It was
Nobody else
wonderful.
agreed, and
Yeah.
he was. Yeah, that actually, I did think of one question. Margaret Fuller. They kept saying, and I'm a little confused on this, that her didn't you say that her father taught her?
He had tutors for her.
Right, he had tutors
Yeah.
for her.
But
She
he
learned. She was very
died, and then the
precocious.
yeah.
She learned, but it said in the thing that I was reading that all of this learning damaged her health.
Well,
Oh, my gosh.
well, that's,
What the hell was that about?
well, I'm not sure about, but you know, I guess if you cram a kid too much, they can get like,
Get nervous.
what's his name? Again, the utilitarian, John Stuart Mill.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a nervous breakdown. His father crammed him. I mean, he was like a good man. He was a good atheist too, but he crammed him with so much stuff, you know, learning and things that he overloaded the poor guy's brain. And at a point, he had a slight nervous breakdown, recovered from it. But I don't think Fuller's health was just never real good.
Well, this seemed to tie it to
Who
her
was who
learning.
said that?
I was a little. It was in the one of those
It
philosophy.
did damage
history.
her health kind of because it wasn't very good when she was like trying to work on the dial.
Yes, they
And
talked
support,
about that too.
yeah, because her father died early, and then he didn't
And they
leave a
never-
lot of money, and she had to support the younger brothers and
and
sisters.
they never paid
for
her
a while.
anyways.
No, they never paid her, So, but
Yeah,
these
isn't that
people always
something?
managed to make some money to keep the wolf from the door, and that was about it.
And the printing houses, would they go to someone to have these things printed, or would they print them in their own little printing press?
Oh no, usually they had them printed, but it wasn't as expensive
Okay,
as it is now. There were a lot of printing presses at the time.
that you would take it to, and
Yeah.
they would do it just like
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did Benjamin Franklin, would he have been a transcendentalist had he lived longer?
No,
No?
no, he was very much a deist with, you'll see in my next lecture, with a lot of Christian, like
Overlay.
overlay, or underlay, I
underlay.
guess. Yeah, but he was pretty much a
Well,
deist.
one more thing that I would like to say about the Transcendentals, a very small movement in the United States of America that only lasted for about 35 or 40 years.
Not even that,
Not even that, and died out at the beginning of the Civil War.
yeah.
And
Basically.
yet, from this little spot in New England, changed a whole country in India.
Yeah,
It
think
was
about
influential in changing a whole country in India through Gandhi.
that. And how about Africa, South Africa?
Because
South Africa's.
Before then, there was no concept of civil disobedience.
Well, there were concepts,
There were
I mean,
concepts
Gandhi
of
read
it.
other people, but Thoreau was very important to him, and it was important to Mandela, which I was sorry that they didn't talk about in the movie.
Was that a transcendentalist philosophy that influenced him, or was that just that
The-
individual's
it was-
personal
It was
philosophy?
more the civil disobedience thing. They were very influenced by it because he wrote about it very eloquently.
But that wasn't.
It's
so
a great
much-
essay to read, by the way.
I read it.
Okay, what did you think of it?
Yeah, but again, for the time, now it seems obvious, but
Yeah,
at that
but
time, I'm
At
sure
that
it would
time,
have
it
been
was like
revolutionary to
really
resist
far out.
the government in
Absolutely.
that way.
Yeah,
And that's why I was wondering whether
opposing
it
the
was
government.
original. I mean, he didn't get that from the Greeks or from the Romans or anybody
No.
else,
No.
right?
No,
So it was original.
yeah, it really was. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like really important. Now, of course, you had all the guys in the French Revolution. They were like, opposing the government too. But this was like really
But that was violent.
strange.
It was
Yeah,
violent.
Yes.
it was very
Yeah,
violent,
this was a
and
Yeah,
his was
armed
non.
resistance, yes.
Yeah, and his was non-violent,
Huh.
and he wrote about it so eloquently.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
guys. Great discussion.
Thank you
I
very
loved
much.
the
Yeah, it
discussion.
was good back and forth.
Yeah, yeah.
There was something I wanted to mention.
Norman
Warren-
Reese, you are really great contributors to this whole
Yes.
thing,
Absolutely.
to the whole
Thank you.
Atheist Scholar meetup and the atheistscholar.org.
Yeah,